The morning was alive with energy. Rays of sunlight poured through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. Children sat at their desks, their hands raised eagerly, voices blending in a lively hum as they competed to answer questions. The room felt bright, full of laughter and enthusiasm, a place where learning brought joy. In the midst of this liveliness, one boy sat apart. At the back of the room, his head remained low, his hand clutching a pencil with a grip so tight it seemed it might snap. His eyes, dark and wide, stayed fixed on the blank page in front of him. While the others leaned forward, their faces glowing with excitement, he seemed to shrink into his chair, his figure barely noticeable amidst the sea of movement. The teacher's gaze swept across the room, her smile widening as she watched her students' enthusiasm. Her eyes fell on the boy and her smile faded, replaced by a quiet concern. His posture seemed weighed down, his shoulders hunched, as though carrying a burden invisible to the world. His stillness was stark against the animated chatter around him. She noticed his hand tremble slightly as he gripped his pencil, his knuckles white with the pressure. Something about the emptiness in his expression struck her deeply. Her instincts stirred. Something was wrong. The joy that usually lit his face was gone, replaced by a silence that felt heavy and unnatural. Why does he sit so still, she thought. Why does he stay so quiet? The questions lingered, her heart heavy with an unspoken worry. His silence wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that whispered of hidden pain, the kind that begged to be noticed. The boy shifted slightly in his chair, his gaze flickering toward the window for a fleeting moment before returning to the desk. His silence felt louder than the chatter surrounding him, a quiet cry for help that only a watchful eye could catch. The teacher couldn't look away, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew the signs. She knew the weight a child could carry without speaking a word. The narrator's voice deepened with a quiet intensity. Beneath the boy's silence lay a storm, swirling and dark, a mystery that no one in the room could see. His quietness, the voice murmured, held secrets that even he struggled to understand. The tale promised more than a simple sadness. It carried the weight of something deeper, a truth that lay buried beneath layers of fear and confusion. In his stillness, the narrator continued, a tale was waiting to be told. One that no one had dared to imagine. The boy sat, his small figure almost lost against the brightness of the day, yet the shadows clinging to him told a story that could not remain hidden for long. The quietness was not emptiness, it was a storm gathering strength, waiting for the moment it would finally be unleashed. Tommy once filled his days with color. His big expressive eyes sparkled with curiosity as he drew pictures of heroes and distant lands. His fingers glided across the pages with excitement, weaving vibrant tales only a child could imagine. But now, those same eyes appeared dull and clouded. The sketches that once burst with life lay abandoned, and his pencil barely moved. His shoulders slumped as if carrying a burden too heavy for his small frame. Tommy kept his head low, avoiding the curious gazes of those around him. The boy who had once shared his drawings so eagerly now sat in silence, his light dim. Ms. Abena saw the change. She had always been attentive, noticing the little things her students said or didn't say. Tommy had been one of her brightest sparks, a child who brought stories to life with his art. She remembered the way his face lit up as he shared his sketches, explaining every detail with pride. Now he was quiet, distant, a shadow of the boy she once knew. Her heart ached as she watched him. Otho then knocked. The joy that used to surround him had vanished, replaced by an unsettling silence. She couldn't ignore the signs. Something was wrong. Tommy's world had changed in ways no child should endure. When he was only 4, his mother passed away, leaving behind a void that no one could fill. His father, a farmer who worked tirelessly to make ends meet, was rarely home. The long hours in the fields left little time for affection or care. In his absence, Tommy's stepmother ruled the household. Her voice was sharp, her words cutting. She viewed Tommy not as a child in need of love, but as an extra hand for chores. The warmth of a mother's embrace was something Tommy could only remember faintly, like a distant dream. Each day felt heavier than the last. His mornings began with the weight of tasks that seemed endless. His afternoons were filled with scoldings for not completing them fast enough. When he tried to draw, his stepmother would scowl, dismissing his efforts as a waste of time. He hid his sketches in corners where no one would find them, fearing her disapproval. The house, once filled with laughter and stories, now felt like a cold, silent space. The walls that had once offered comfort now seemed to close in around him. Tommy longed for the days when his world was full of love and color. Miss Abina couldn't shake the memories of Tommy's brighter days. She often thought of the way he used to beam with excitement, holding up his latest masterpiece for everyone to see. His drawings were a window into his world, a blend of imagination and hope. But now, that window had closed. He avoided her gaze, his once confident voice reduced to a murmur. The light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a heaviness that made her heart sink. She wondered what had stolen that joy, and why he seemed so afraid to share it. As the days passed, her concern grew. Tommy's hesitation became more pronounced. He fumbled over his words when asked questions and seemed to shrink into his seat. He avoided the laughter of his classmates, retreating further into himself. Miss Abina observed the subtle changes, each one adding to her unease. She couldn't help but feel a deep responsibility to uncover the truth behind his silence. Whatever was causing this, she knew she had to act before the spark that once defined Tommy faded completely. Miss Abina's eyes drifted to Tommy as the class settled in. His uniform was wrinkled, and a faint smudge streaked across the collar. The once crisp, neat appearance he carried was gone. His hair, usually combed neatly, fell messily over his forehead. His eyes, once lively, now seemed heavy with exhaustion. She felt a pang of concern, her thoughts lingering on the changes she had noticed over the weeks. She wondered silently how someone so young could look so worn. She approached him gently, her voice calm as she asked about his well-being. Tommy looked up briefly, his gaze skimming over her face before darting back to the desk. He whispered softly, "I'm fine." But his voice lacked strength. It was a response that said more than it revealed. Miss Abina's heart grew heavier as she watched him. She could sense the weight he carried, even if he refused to share it. The classroom buzzed with energy during the art activity, but Tommy sat quietly at his desk, pencil in hand. His strokes on the paper were slow and deliberate, and as the picture took form, it caught Miss Abina's attention. A small boy stood alone in the middle of a storm, dark clouds swirling above him. Shadowy figures loomed on all sides, their jagged shapes threatening to close in. The scene was haunting, a sharp contrast to the bright, cheerful drawings Tommy used to create. Miss Abina leaned closer, her voice steady as she asked about the drawing. Tommy shrugged and muttered, "It's nothing," his tone flat. But his hands trembled as he clutched the pencil, betraying the truth he tried to hide. Miss Abina studied the picture again. The details spoke of a storm far greater than the one on the page. A storm raging inside the boy who had drawn it. As the children packed their bags, whispers filled the room. Miss Abina overheard snippets of conversation. "He doesn't like going home," one child said. Another voice added, "His stepmother is always yelling at him." The words sent a chill through her. The pieces were falling into place, each whisper revealing another layer of Tony's silent struggles. Ms. Abina's determination grew stronger. Later, she approached Tommy, her voice soft as she asked him about what she had overheard. He stiffened immediately, his shoulders tensing as he gripped his notebook tightly. His lips pressed into a thin line and he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with unspoken fears. Ms. Abina saw the wall he had built around himself, a shield against the questions he wasn't ready to answer. That afternoon, Ms. Abina walked with purpose toward Tommy's home. Her heart raced, but her resolve was firm. She knew she couldn't stand by any longer. When she arrived, she was greeted by Tommy's stepmother, whose sharp tone made her suspicions grow. The woman waved off her concerns, claiming Tommy was lazy and spoiled. Her words were harsh, dismissive, as though the boy's struggles were nothing more than an inconvenience. As Miss Abina turned to leave, her eyes caught sight of Tommy sitting outside. He was crouched by the dirt, sketching with a stick. She watched as he carefully drew the image of a small boy behind bars. The boy's face was filled with despair, his arms stretched toward the bars as if reaching for freedom. The drawing was raw, powerful, and heartbreaking. Miss Abina felt her breath catch. She stepped closer, her voice gentle as she asked him about the picture. Tommy's eyes widened, and he quickly erased the drawing with his hands. His gaze dropped to the ground, his small frame trembling slightly. Fear was etched across his face, and Miss Abena's heart broke for him. She knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen. Tommy's silence was telling a story, and it was a story she had to uncover. The classroom felt different, quieter than usual. Miss Abena scanned the room and saw the empty seat at the back. Her chest tightened as a sense of unease crept in. Tommy had never missed a day of school. She thought of his quiet demeanor the day before and the faint tremble in his voice when he said he was fine. The absence spoke louder than any words he could have offered. Her worry grew as the day dragged on, each passing moment filled with unanswered questions. Her steps quickened as she approached Tommy's home. A faint sound made her pause. It was a voice, weak and trembling, calling out faintly. Her heart pounded as she followed the sound to a small shed. She peered inside and froze. Tommy sat huddled in the dark, his small frame trembling. His eyes widened as they met hers, and tears streaked his dusty cheeks. The sight of him, locked away and shivering, was too much to bear. The stepmother appeared, her tone sharp and dismissive as she explained why Tommy was locked up. Rain spilled water all over the kitchen floor. He needs to learn discipline. Her words were cold, her expression void of remorse. Miss Abena felt anger rise in her chest, her fists clenching at the woman's indifference. The father stood nearby, his face blank as though carved from stone. Miss Abena turned to him, her voice steady but filled with disappointment. He muttered something about the hardships of running a farm and managing the family. His shoulders slumped, and he looked away, avoiding her gaze. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken guilt and quiet resignation. Miss Abena's voice shook as she demanded Tommy's release. Her anger spilled over as she accused them of cruelty and neglect. The boy needed care, not punishment, she declared, her words echoing with conviction. The stepmother's eyes narrowed as she lashed out, her voice rising. She called Tommy a troublemaker and defended her actions, insisting she was doing what was best for him. Her defiance was sharp, but Miss Abena stood firm, her resolve unshaken. The father sighed deeply, his body sagging under the weight of the moment. He spoke softly, admitting the struggles they faced. His words carried a heaviness, a quiet defeat that spoke of long, weary days and nights. He looked to the ground, unable to meet Miss Abena's determined gaze. Miss Abena left the house and turned to the neighbors. Her voice was filled with emotion as she shared Tommy's story. She described the small boy locked in a shed, trembling in the dark, his silence a cry for help. Her words carried a weight that moved the crowd, and they nodded in understanding. They knew they had to act. The elders arrived, their presence commanding respect. They listened carefully as Miss Abena recounted what she had seen. Their faces were stern, their expressions unreadable, but their silence carried the authority of generations. They moved as one toward the house, their voices calm but firm as they addressed the parents. The mother and father shifted uneasily under their steady gaze, their confidence faltering. Tommy stood quietly, his hands clenched at his sides. He hesitated, his small body trembling as he stepped forward. His voice quivered as he spoke, his word laced with pain. He shared how lonely and scared he felt at home, his days filled with harsh words and heavy burdens. The silence in the crowd was profound, broken only by the sound of his trembling voice. The elders nodded solemnly, their faces softening with empathy. Tommy's honesty stirred something in the crowd. Murmurs of support rippled through the neighbors, their voices filled with a shared sense of responsibility. The boy's words had touched them deeply, awakening a desire to protect and nurture. The elders turned to the parents, their voices firm yet measured. They spoke of the consequences of neglect, reminding the parents of their duty to provide not just food and shelter, but love and care. They warned that change was not optional and that failure to do so would result in communal action. Their words carried the weight of tradition and unity, a force stronger than any single household. The air grew still as the parents lowered their heads, the gravity of the moment sinking in. The elders left them with a final word. Love, once neglected, could still be restored, but it would take effort and intention. The message hung in the air, a solemn reminder of the power of community and the resilience of a child's heart. The elders gathered, their voices calm but resolute as they listened to Miss Abena's plea. They understood the depth of Tommy's pain and acted quickly. Arranging for him to live with his kind aunt, the woman welcomed him with open arms, her warmth like a shield against the shadows that had followed him. She assured him he was safe, her voice steady and soothing, as she promised he would never feel alone again. Tommy's world began to change. The days were no longer filled with silence and fear. Instead, he found joy in small moments. He played in the open air, his laughter carrying through the village. His notebook, once filled with dark and lonely images, now came alive with vibrant drawings of smiling faces and bright colors. His days felt lighter, and the nights, once haunted by restless dreams, became peaceful. For the first time in what felt like forever, he began to feel like a child again. His aunt watched over him with unwavering care. She sat beside him each night, her voice soft as she reminded him he was loved. Her words were simple but powerful, wrapping him in a sense of belonging he had almost forgotten. Each time she spoke, the weight on his small shoulders seemed to lift, little by little. Tommy's confidence returned, and with it, the spark in his eyes that had long been missing. One day, Tommy's father came to visit. He stood quietly for a moment before kneeling to meet his son's gaze. His voice trembled as he spoke, heavy with regret. He promised to change, to listen, and to be the father Tommy deserved. His eyes, filled with sorrow, searched for forgiveness. Tommy's small hand reached out, a quiet gesture of understanding that carried more weight than any words could. The stepmother watched from a distance, her heart torn between guilt and pride as she saw Tommy smile once more. She reflected on her harshness, her cold words that had built walls instead of bridges. Slowly, she softened. Her attempts to rebuild trust were hesitant at first, but her efforts were genuine. Each small step she took toward kindness brought a quiet hope that healing might be possible. At school, Miss Abena's heart swelled with pride as she watched Tommy laugh with his classmates. The boy who had once been silent now filled the room with joy. His hand shot up eagerly to answer questions, and his drawings were bright and full of life. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing her instincts had guided her to protect him when he needed it most. The village noticed the transformation. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the power of love and the courage to change. They saw how a broken family had begun to mend, inspired by the determination of one teacher and the resilience of a small boy. In Tommy's laughter they found a lesson, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love and care could light the way to healing. Teachers hold a power that goes beyond books and lessons. They have the ability to see what others may overlook. Every small gesture, every quiet glance, tells a story waiting to be understood. A child who avoids meeting eyes, a smile that seems forced, or a silence that grows too loud. These are signs that speak volumes to a teacher willing to listen. Behind the quiet moments lie truths that cannot be ignored. A teacher's role is to notice, to question, and to act when no one else will. Advocating for a child is not always easy, but it is a calling that must be answered. A teacher stands as a bridge between the unspoken pain of a child and the actions that can bring change. It takes courage to confront the unseen, to step into a situation and demand answers. But in doing so, a teacher becomes more than an educator. They become a protector, a guide, and a voice for those who have none. It is in these moments that a child learns they are not invisible, that someone sees their worth and will fight for it. Parents often believe that providing food and shelter is enough, but a child's heart needs more than physical care. Love is found in the moments when a parent listens without judgment. When they notice the fear hidden in their child's gaze. To truly care is to open the door to trust, to make a child feel safe enough to speak their mind and share their fears. It is a balance of meeting their needs while nurturing their soul. Love is not only in what is given, but in what is felt. Neglect does not always come from malice. Sometimes it is born from distraction, from the weight of daily struggles. Yet its effects run deep, leaving scars that are often unseen. A parent must choose to see their child not just as a responsibility but as a person with emotions that matter. In choosing to reflect on their actions, they can break the cycle of neglect and replace it with understanding. In doing so, they create a bond that offers security and hope, a foundation that no hardship can shake. Tomi's journey reminds us that even the deepest silence can be broken by the sound of love. What was once buried in fear has now risen as laughter, bright and full of life. His transformation is a testament to what care and compassion can achieve. His voice, once hidden, now carries the strength of resilience and the joy of a child who knows he is valued. The story leaves a message that echoes through the hearts of all who hear it. In a child's laughter is the reflection of the love they have received. It is a reminder that healing is possible when compassion is offered. The strength of a community, the actions of a teacher, and the love of a parent together can heal wounds, mend broken spirits, and bring light to even the darkest corners.